But first, there's really only one issue at the moment that has any serious cut through, and that's cost of living, particularly as we come into the Christmas period and people are having to fork out for family lunches and gifts and, of course, things to do during the school holidays. Every dollar counts. The price of domestic flights has gone through the roof. I paid nearly 4 times as much for a flight from Melbourne to Adelaide this week as I did with the same airline at this time last year, so interstate holidays will be out of the question for a lot of people, and there's no doubt that a lot of people are feeling the pinch. That's why National Cabinet discussed today how to reduce power prices, and we'll get into the details of what they decided a little later in the show. But amongst this never-ending argument about power prices, we seem to keep sidestepping the argument about the power mix. We know power prices go up as demand goes up and reliability goes down, which is what's happened as more renewable energy has come onto the grid and cheap, reliable coal-fired power has gone off-grid. There are a number of coal-fired power stations that are scheduled to shut down in the next decade, but a big problem this year has been that coal-fired power stations unexpectedly went offline for maintenance and repairs. At one point in May, nearly a third of the country's coal power generation was off. It was a quarter in June. And it's no wonder these places have gone to rack and ruin when renewable energy has been subsidised like nobody's business to the point where it has become cheaper to produce than coal-fired power. And if you're a commercial power producer or retailer, you're obviously going to pursue the product that returns you the most profit. That's obviously the point of all these subsidies, to make renewables cheaper than coal, etc. But it's happened too fast and we don't have enough to make up for the coal power we're losing. According to the Australian Energy Market Operator Chief Executive Daniel Westerman, by 2050, wind and solar farms need to increase 9-fold, the backup supply for renewables has to triple, and we need 10,000 kilometres of new power lines. Now, these are big changes, and if we're willing to redraw the power grid so significantly, why will no political leader stand up and advocate for nuclear power? It's not an overnight fix to power prices, sure, but it has the potential to be a cheap and emission-free form of power for Australia well into the future, and we act like it doesn't exist. When we have about a third of the world's uranium deposits right here in Australia, a third right under our feet. And instead of finding a way to use it ourselves, making the most of the resources we have in this country for the betterment of our country, we keep shipping it overseas to people who actually have the sense to use it. Now, when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister, the coalition government didn't say a word about nuclear power. Like everyone else, they basically pretended it didn't exist. Now they're in opposition, the coalition seem to have changed their tune, but really, it's too little too late. Then in came South Australian Labor Premier Peter Malinauskas this week to say, hang on, let's be a bit more rational about nuclear power. In an interview with The Advertiser, he said the nuclear submarine program in SA would help dispel the myths around nuclear power and industries. He went on to say, quote, "In respect of my position on nuclear power for civil consumption or use, I've always thought that the ideological opposition that exists in some quarters to nuclear power is ill-founded. Nuclear power is a source of baseload energy with zero carbon emissions. So for someone like myself, who is dedicated to a decarbonisation effort, I think we should be open-minded to those technologies, and I think it would be foolhardy to have a different approach. That is a sensible, level-headed signal to open the nuclear debate." He continued, quote, "I get frustrated with a nuclear debate that has emerged in Australia recently because you've got people on the left who seem to be flat out opposed to nuclear power for ideological reasons, despite the fact we've got a climate challenge and are wanting to decarbonise. Then we've got people on the right who seem to be utterly in favour of nuclear power without any reference to the cost of it. It strikes me as starting to become one of these polarised debates that has been consumed by the culture wars rather than an evidence-based discussion." But then Prime Minister Anthony Albanese went on radio and said Mr Malinauskas was wrong. So he then went on the ABC to say that nuclear power would make energy more expensive, and he was, quote, in furious agreement with the PM. Now, it's a pretty big change of tune. And what a disappointment that is. I mean, Mr Malinauskas tried to open a sensible debate. The PM shut it down and the Premier just fell into line. And that's the problem here. It's a problem Mr Malinauskas himself identified in his original comments. This has unfortunately turned into a with us or against us argument. And part of the reason for that is that nuclear power is banned in Australia. No one can genuinely say that nuclear energy is viable or unviable in Australia when it's not even legal to do it. No power generating company is seriously looking into how it could be done because they're not allowed to do it. Why would they bother? They're just looking to operate within the rules as they exist currently so that they can make a dollar. What we do know is that of the 20 highest energy consuming countries in the world, all use or plan to use nuclear power except Australia. Why? I mean, you can't seriously tell me that it works everywhere else, but it couldn't possibly work here. Now, unless you believe that nuclear power is terrible in and of itself and will lead to children being born with two heads or dogs glowing in the dark or something, there is no genuine argument against lifting the nuclear energy ban. If you think it's uneconomical, then lifting the ban will make no difference. No one would build nuclear reactors. Lifting the ban would let the market decide. It would put governments and private power generators in the position of being able to consider nuclear energy in the mix. If it's not a value for money proposition, then it simply won't happen. You have to wonder whether all these people who are so quick to dismiss the proposition of emission-free nuclear power want to maintain the ban because they're worried it might actually be viable, which would of course blow a hole in their ideological attachment to renewable energy. We can't afford to lose opportunities because some people on the left are scared of being embarrassed.